Yo guys, welcome back to another video. Lately, I've been reading hella Wolverine comics. I started from the beginning pretty much, and I'm making my way through. I have most of the omnibuses, and if you guys don't know, Wolverine is one of my favorite characters, my favorite superhero that is out there. I love Wolverine. As you can see, I got a little Wolverine guy right there on my desk. And there's a bunch of X-Men and Wolverine stuff above me that you guys can't see. But Wolverine is my favorite character. And I thought, you know what? Wolverine deserves his own video. I'm going to be briefly talking about these books that I read this month. At the end of the month, where I'll do a video briefly talking about everything that I read during the month of, what is this, September? But yeah, I wanted to give a special spotlight on my favorite character. So sadly, I do not own the first omnibus for Wolverine, but I still was able to manage. I still managed to read all of the contents of the first omnibus, I believe, because essentially the first omnibus collects everything that's in this first epic collection, as well as the 1982 miniseries with Frank Miller and Chris Claremont, and then as well as Weapon X, of course, by Barry Windsor Smith, which guys, if you guys remember, I reviewed that, or I talked about it I read it in August, and I talked about it at the end of August, and I had already talked about the 1982 Wolverine a long time ago, so I just needed to read what was in this epic collection, which I am lucky enough to have, as this is also currently out of print. But I found this, I found this a while ago at a local comic shop in Virginia called Time Capsule in Hopewell, Virginia. And they had this, so that's pretty sick. Yeah, I'm glad I never got rid of this, because I was debating on getting rid of this. I mean, it's the first Wolverine it's the first Wolverine solo series, right? But I kind of had this negative stigma in my mind about retro comics, having tried reading X-Men from the 70s with, Second Genesis with Chris Claremont, and especially with Chris Claremont being very wordy, and very campy, and I don't know, I just don't vibe, or I didn't vibe with Second Genesis in particular, which I've heard a lot of people say isn't his best work anyway, and that I should try reading other X-Men stuff. I've since adjusted my opinion on old comics, but when I did try reading X-Men at that time, one thing that did stand out that I liked was Chris Claremont's voice for Wolverine, which makes sense because he essentially recreated Wolverine from the ground up, as he was essentially, a D-list character that showed up once or twice or something like that. Of course, his first appearance being in Hulk, but he sort of reinvented him with Second Genesis. So, the quintessential Wolverine voice and character comes from Chris Claremont. Anyway, so that being said, this here was absolutely fantastic. I won't lie. I was scared going in because it is like retro. But one thing I've noticed is that once you get away out of the 70s and into the 80s, the writing becomes a lot more tolerable. Out of the Silver Age, I guess, into, I guess, the Bronze Age, the Copper Age. I forget what they call it. But the writing does become a lot more bearable. And this first epic collection of Wolverine was an absolute treat. It starts off with Marvel Comics Presents 1 through 10, which just follows Wolverine, sneaking around Madripoor, fighting some, gangsters, essentially, and rescuing Tiger, who ends up becoming, a gangster, right? So those first 10 issues or so, or sections of the Marvel Comics Presents, acts as that first little prologue, and then we get into the actual main series, and I thoroughly enjoyed this main series. At least here in the first 10 or so issues, I mean, everything, the world building, all of the characters. We get to see Silver Samurai, which is a character that I wasn't too familiar with outside of the movie The Wolverine, which turns out he is very different. You know, that is in his movie form, it's a bastardization of his actual character. And of course, he appears in the 1982 miniseries, and that's where I was first reintroduced to him. But he's actually a super cool character. I do love me some Silver Samurai now. Yeah, everything in these first like 10 issues is really great. Making friends on Madripoor. You got Lindsay and Jessica Drew hanging out. You know, all these characters. You got the Black Blade within these first few issues where Wolverine becomes possessed by this demon, right? You got Bloodsport and Roughhouse. I just really like the character dynamics, especially when, you know, you got Tiger versus General, was it McCoy? I think it's some Vietnamese name I don't really know how to pronounce, but in Prince Baron, right? Just all of these different, this little underground kind of crime syndicate politics that goes on the island of Madripoor, just with Wolverine kind of being in the middle of it. It's just a really fun read. And then of course we get into the stuff with Mr. Fix-It, with Hulk coming onto the island, and yeah, that was also really funny and interesting, you know, because I'm believe it or not, I love Hulk, but I'm not super familiar with his mythos and exactly how how Hulk works, you know, because I originally thought that Hulk was like, you know, Bruce Banner, but just when he gets angry, he turns into the Hulk. But recently I've come to find out that the Hulk is kind of his own entity. And it's more complex than just Bruce Banner when he's angry. It's like the Hulk is like a separate character. And it's almost like a multiple personality disorder as opposed to just an enraged form of Bruce Banner. Which isn't something I think is translated very well, or maybe I'm just an idiot, but it's not translated very well in the Avengers movies. But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't super familiar with like how the Hulk works, right? You know, so this gives some interesting insight into that. And I gotta say, my favorite issues in this first like section in the Marvel Comics Presents, right, is once we get into, was that issue 10? So looking after flipping through, it's issues 9 and 10 were my absolute favorites, probably so far that I've read. Issue 9 sort of follows, it's a little bit of a backstory, like a flashback issue, but it follows this group of like bad people, like these mercenaries that mowed down like a village of innocent civilians during Vietnam, I believe, and like raped and pillaged and all that stuff. And Wolverine happened to be present there, but he like goes after these people later in life and, you know, enacts righteous revenge, I guess. He avenges the people that were slaughtered, but in the way that you follow the people, like there's a group of bad guys, these mercenaries, and they're kind of picked off one by one. It almost reminded me of kind of a slasher flick, which is something that I think is really cool with Wolverine. Something that, you know, is done in Weapon X, right, by Barry Windsor Smith. It definitely, you take a back seat, and Wolverine seems almost like an unstoppable force, you know, picking off your people from the shadows, like your Michael Myers or your Jason Voorhees, right? And especially because you're basically reading like recordings and like journal entries in Weapon X, so it's almost like a found footage kind of thing too. But I really like when they're able to play with that and make Wolverine almost like a horror villain, right? But of course he's a good guy, and you're following the bad guys as they're getting wrecked. And then issue 10 is really awesome because that's one of the first fights that he has with Sabretooth. It shows, you know, I won't spoil it for anybody who wants to read it, but It's loosely adapted if you've ever seen Wolverine or X-Men Origins Wolverine, the really crappy one. I actually love that movie for like various parts of it. It's a really bad movie, but I grew up with it. So that first section of the movie, well, I guess not the first one, but the part of the movie where you follow Wolverine or Logan when he's like a lumberjack and he has his girlfriend and all that, and then the stuff with Sabretooth comes back, all that kind of stuff, that was loosely adapted from issue 10 of the Wolverine 1988 run. So yeah, it was really cool seeing that, and just Wolverine fight Sabretooth for one of the first times. But yeah, it's really interesting, and yeah, those two issues in particular were really awesome. And then the second part of this epic collection follows Wolverine fighting against like this demonic like vampire cult, which is kind of weird. This second part was definitely kind of all over the place. There's plenty of Indiana Jones references, and like there's a character who's, you think he's like crazy and schizophrenic or something, but turns out he's actually like really seeing that there's like vampire people running around, and there's this stone, the Gehenna stone, and their leader of this group of bad guys is Baal, and so it plays around with like I guess Hebrew and Mesopotamian mythology in that way, with Gehenna and Baal and such. And then it's kind of, there's this cool part towards the end where they make the analogy that Wolverine is kind of like this like hero chosen by God to like fight against the Baal and like his demonic forces. It's pretty cool. Like there's some cool aspects of it, and they're just kind of running around. You know, everybody who gets their hands on this stone, or pieces of the stone rather, because they're trying to put, like, the stone was shattered, so there's different pieces, and then once you put them all together, it unlocks like this like great evil power, right? But anybody who comes into contact with these pieces kind of gets corrupted and like jealous and like cynical, and like it's almost kind of like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings in that sense. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that happens in there. I'm not going to talk too long about that, but this section of the story wasn't great. It wasn't bad, but I definitely think the first half of this epic collection was far better. Yeah, I mean, it was entertaining. It was just kind of weird and all over the place. And then moving on here, this is where we start to get into Wolverine Omnibus number 2, of course, with this beautiful Jim Lee cover of issue 27, but there's a little bit of overlap, if I remember correctly. This first omnibus does have some parts of the Gehenna Stone affair, because I think, yeah, because the first actual omnibus only has, what is it, probably 1 through 10 of the like actual main series, and then it has, like I said, the Barry Windsor Smith stuff, and then it has the mini series. So this one picks up and it has the Gehenna Stone affair. So there is a little bit of overlap here, but it's whatever. So the way this actually starts out is there's like this there's a couple of like mini series stuff. I will be honest, I didn't read everything in here start to finish. I skipped over a lot of the bonus stuff, but I suppose I could probably go back and read this first little mini series. It's like a Havoc, Wolverine and Havoc story, I guess. And then there's another little mini series or like special issue with Nick Fury, and I didn't read that either. But then once we get past the Gehenna Stone stuff, we get to probably my favorite portion of this omnibus, and that is the Wolverine Jungle Adventure, written by Walter Simonson, and then it also has art by Mike Mignola. And essentially Wolverine drops into, where are they, in Krakoa? Is that where they're... Something like that. Or no, the Savage Land, sorry. They drop into the Savage Land, and Wolverine is talking to these, like, cavemen, like, indigenous people, and they believe him to be, like, a prophesized warrior, right? And yeah, they're fighting monsters and stuff. We're like, yeah, there's like dinosaurs. It's the Savage Land. But come to find out, it's all kind of artificial, and there's this version of Apocalypse that's on this island. So Wolverine has to fight him. I won't spoil too much of what happens, because this is like a one-off special. I don't know how many people have checked this out. But yeah, it's really good if you guys want to check that one out. And then picking up with issue 17, we get into this next arc, which again wasn't my favorite. It was kind of weird. You go to, like, Wolverine goes to Central America, and there's this dictator there trying to, what is he even trying to do? Like, he has like this special mystical cocaine that they were trying to get, and they're trying to make people smoke the crack so that they get superpowers and create their own superhumans through this cocaine. And I think he's hired by General whatever the fuck, Karma's uncle, who Wolverine has run-ins throughout the series. But yeah, they're trying to create superhumans through cocaine, essentially, and they kidnap Roughhouse, who is a villain prior, but then he kind of becomes a good guy throughout this arc. There's this cyborg Nazi named Geist, who's a terrible dude. He's like a mercenary, ex-Nazi. He was like Hitler's right-hand man. So they have to fight him multiple times. There's this character named Tiger Shark. Yeah, just like some minor villains. And I mean, it was just kind of ridiculous, because what you come to find out is that there's this dark god that was killed by the Eternals, and the dark god like was fused into the earth when it died, but it fused into the earth in like South America, and where this cocaine is growing, it basically grew through the energy. Like, the energy is being channeled through the plants, so when you're smoking this crack, you're smoking like an eldritch god, and then you slowly become possessed by this eldritch god from smoking this mystical crack. And so Wolverine gets infected with this crack, and he has to like fight this mystical god, like this like eldritch being within his own mind, and like help take down this, like, there's this character Bandera, La Bandera, and she's like this freedom fighter, and they're basically taking down this, you know, corrupt Central American government cartel shit, you know. Yeah, that's what happens in that arc. Wasn't super interesting. I mean, it was an okay read. I would probably give it 3 stars, and it's whatever. But again, everything for the most part within this first epic collection is perfection. If I really wish I could get my hands on that first omnibus, because that has everything you need. I really like Weapon X, the Barry Windsor Smith story, plus you've got the first 10 issues of this, and it also has the first 10 like Marvel Comics Presents stories, and then the mini series, which I didn't care for as much, but it's still a neat story and having that in there. So if you're able to get your hands on the first omnibus for Wolverine, that is jam-packed with amazing stories. That is one that I would highly recommend. But anyways, moving on. You got a bunch of Marvel Comics Present stuff. Didn't really care to read this because it doesn't matter. Then moving on, we get to this Marvel Comics Presents section. It's just a few issues where it's Wolverine and Spider-Man teaming up. I think was it Eric Larson on art there? Yeah, and writing. You got Eric Larson's Spider-Man on there with Wolverine. So they end up fighting at first, but then they team up. And it's just like a neat little story, I guess. Then you get to this story where Wolverine faces off with Wild Child. So that one was really neat. Wild Child is like very similar to Sabretooth. So it's just like a Wolverine fighting another kind of, I don't know, like bestial kind of wild character, right? Wild Child. So that's a cool little part. And then going back into the main series, you get a couple issues here that are kind of random, just like kind of one-off issues, I guess, while they're figuring out what to do with the story. So there's one with this like mercenary carrying around a bomb, but then you get this issue here. Which issue is this? Issue 25, which is really neat, where Wolverine is tasked with protecting this little kid who's the son of like a drug lord or like mafioso, essentially. He's tasked with protecting this kid while his dad goes off and fights this gang war. And so he's like talking to this kid about his backstory and all that. Yeah, so that was a pretty neat issue. And then of course that moves into issue 26, which was also pretty neat. It was again just kind of a one-off issue, but it had Wolverine like in Japan or whatever, so you know, can't beat that. And then we move into the Lazarus Project, starting with issue 27. And this, again, was kind of all over the place. Again, they're after, like, this stone thing. But what happens is Wolverine fights this scientist lady with this giant robot. And she spills some poison in his face. And he ends up blacking out and waking up on this small Asian island, not knowing who he is or having any of it. He has, like, amnesia. And so he becomes a part of this island and, like, their society. And then people come to attack the island because they are holding the stone, not the Gehenna stone, but I don't even remember what it's called, honestly. But yeah, I don't know, this arc wasn't that good. It was kind of all over the place. Yeah, I don't know, didn't really care for it all too much, but it ends satisfyingly, with Wolverine kind of fucking with the corrupt general guy, and I think Prince Baron as well. He kind of goes after them a little bit because they're all corrupt a-holes. And then we get another section of what Marvel Comics presents with Wolverine and the Hulk. I read that part. It was okay. You know, again, I probably could have skipped it, but it's Wolverine and the Hulk. And then we have this section with Wolverine and Ghost Rider, which I didn't read because I read the Hulk stuff and I was like, I can just skip it. And then finally, the final little section of this omnibus that I read is Wolverine Bloodlust, which is this short story about Wolverine and these psychic alien like stoner yetis, pretty much. Again, you can probably skip it, but the first bit of it was really cool, where he's kind of in this bar, and these aliens are infecting him, kind of like infecting his psyche, and they're making him more wild, and he has to try to control his bloodlust, and he's just fucking people up. I mean, that part was pretty cool, but then it kind of gets trippy and weird. But anyway, overall, 30 issues deep into Wolverine, plus reading some bonus content. What am I thinking? This is, what the original run is like 189 issues. So if I'm at 30, so I'm like a sixth of the way through the original Wolverine run. So that's pretty neat. What am I thinking? Like I said throughout the video, this first Epic collection was really awesome. I really enjoyed just about everything in here. The Gehenna Stone arc was neat. Wasn't my favorite, but it wasn't bad. It still maintained a quality. But most of the content throughout the second omnibus here was just kind of, it was alright. You know, it was not nearly as good, but it was still worth reading for me because it's just more Wolverine content, and I like Wolverine. But I'm hoping that with the third omnibus, stuff gets better. And I think, you know, just looking at the back and knowing what issues are in it, and like looking at the covers and stuff, I think we're due for some cool shit to go down in the next omnibus. So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, I kind of rambled on enough reviewing these couple of books here. I'm going to do these videos every so often and kind of update you guys where I'm at in my Wolverine read-through journey. But yeah, so far, Wolverine, it's been good. You know, like I said, this first book, very solid. If you want some good Wolverine content, read this. Or, you know, get the first omnibus and just read the first omnibus, because everything in there is absolutely worth reading. The second omnibus, it has some good parts. A lot of it is just kind of, you know, campy comics, you know, just comics, you know, nothing too special, but I'm hoping that we get there again. So anyways, guys, thank you for watching. If you stuck through this video, this is just kind of a rambling video, but you know, it's whatever. But yeah, guys, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.